We're about to test the limits of your gag reflex with a tour through history's most revolting menus. We're talking about baby mice drowning in wine for health, hundreds of birds fermenting inside a seal for months, and a parasitic eel pie that actually killed a king. This isn't just a list of weird food, it's proof that our ancestors had stomachs made of iron and absolutely zero health regulations. Here are 33 historical dishes that will make you want to hug your refrigerator. 1. Let's ease into this with a delightful beverage from ancient China and Korea, a little something called mice wine. Imagine you're feeling unwell, so you visit a traditional healer who offers you a health tonic. He hands you a bottle of rice wine, and as you look closer, you see dozens of tiny, pink, hairless baby mice floating inside. This isn't a prank. This was a legitimate medical treatment. The process involved taking a litter of mice, no more than 3 days old, and drowning them in the wine. The bottle was then sealed and left to ferment for over a year. The logic, if you can call it that, was that the life essence of the mice would infuse the alcohol with potent healing properties, curing everything from asthma to liver failure. It's the kind of cure that makes you wonder if you'd rather just stay sick. 2. In the vast frozen landscapes of the Arctic, finding your daily greens is a challenge. So, what did the indigenous peoples of the region do? They outsourced the job to a reindeer. A truly unique delicacy was the partially digested contents of a reindeer's stomach. Right after a hunt, they would carefully cut open the stomach to access the warm, pulpy mass of lichen, moss, and grasses the animal had been grazing on. This pre-chewed semi-fermented slurry was a vital, and often only, source of essential vitamins and minerals. Think of it as nature's original smoothie, pre-blended by a four-legged expert. It was a brilliant act of survival, ensuring that nothing went to waste, but it's also a meal that required you to get comfortable with the idea of eating something that has already been eaten once. 3. If you thought the last one was intense, allow me to introduce Kiviaq, a winter food from the Inuit of Greenland that is an absolute masterclass in extreme fermentation. The recipe is simple but horrifying. First, you take a seal and remove its insides, leaving a hollow skin bag. Then, you cram up to 500 small seabirds called auks into the cavity. Feathers, beaks, everything. Once it's packed tight, you sew it shut. Seal the seams with seal grease to act as a bouncer against flies, and then bury the whole thing under a pile of rocks for 3 to 7 months. The birds slowly ferment in the seal's juices, breaking down into a pungent, cheesy, and incredibly high-energy paste. It's eaten raw, often during celebrations. It's a dish that takes months of preparation for a taste that will likely haunt you for a lifetime. 4. Sweden. We love your furniture and your pop music, but we need to discuss Surströmming. This fermented Baltic herring holds the undisputed title for one of the most foul-smelling foods on planet Earth. The fish undergoes just enough salting to prevent it from rotting, then it continues to ferment inside a sealed can. This process creates intense internal pressure, making the can bulge like a cartoon bomb. When you finally puncture the can, an act that must be done outdoors and preferably underwater, it releases an olfactory apocalypse. The aroma is a soul-crushing blend of rotten eggs, vinegar, and rancid butter. Several major airlines have banned it on their flights, classifying the pressurized cans as a potential explosive hazard. It's less of a food and more of a social experiment to see who your real friends are. 5. Picture a perfect Sunday brunch with a tall stack of pancakes. Now, imagine those pancakes are not golden brown, but a deep, vampiric black. In parts of Scandinavia and the Baltic states, this is a reality with blood pancakes. The recipe is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of using milk or water for the batter, you use whipped animal blood, typically from pigs. For centuries, this was a perfectly normal, resourceful way to ensure no part of an animal was wasted. The resulting pancake is thin, savory, and packed with iron, with a distinct metallic tang. They are often served with lingonberry jam, because apparently a dollop of sweet fruit is all you need to distract yourself from the fact that your breakfast looks like something Dracula would make after a particularly good night out. 6. There are many ways to enjoy soup, but having your meal stare back at you with tiny, beady eyes is usually not one of them. Welcome to the world of bat soup, a dish found in parts of Asia and the Pacific Islands. The preparation is brutally simple. An entire bat is boiled, often in coconut milk with ginger and spices, and served whole in your bowl. We're talking the full package: fur, leathery wings, and a tiny fanged face peeking out from the broth. Those who have eaten it say the meat is tender, but the experience is dominated by the bat's famously musky, urine-like odor that intensifies during cooking. It's a dish that seems specifically designed to challenge your courage, your gag reflex, and your fundamental belief that food shouldn't look like a Halloween decoration. 7. The Tudor court in England was a place of immense power, political intrigue, and food that was completely over the top. Case in point, the interment of the fowl. This wasn't just a dish. It was a declaration of obscene wealth and a feat of culinary engineering. It was a Russian nesting doll made of meat. A chef would take a small bird, like a pigeon, stuff it inside a chicken, stuff that chicken inside a goose, and then stuff that goose inside a massive turkey. This feathered behemoth was then roasted for hours. The goal wasn't to create a perfectly cooked, delicious meal. It was virtually impossible to cook all the layers evenly. The point was to create a spectacle, a showstopper that proved the host was so rich they could afford to turn an entire flock of birds into a single, absurdly decadent centerpiece. 8. Let's talk about a Japanese delicacy called umi-samen, which translates beautifully to sea noodles. It sounds elegant, doesn't it? The reality, however, is significantly more slimy. These aren't noodles made of wheat, but the bright yellow, tangled egg strings of a giant sea slug known as a sea hare. These creatures lay their eggs in long, gelatinous, spaghetti-like ribbons, which are then harvested and eaten completely raw, usually with a splash of soy sauce. Diners describe the texture as a unique sensory experience, where each tiny egg pops in the mouth, releasing a briny burst of ocean flavor. It's a high-end dish, but it requires you to get past the fundamental concept that you're eating the raw, unborn children of a slimy, bottom-dwelling sea slug. 9. The ancient Romans loved their condiments as much as we love ketchup, but their #1 sauce would make your stomach turn. It was called garum, a fermented fish sauce that was drizzled on basically everything, from bread to desserts. To make this liquid gold, you would take the guts, gills, and blood of fish like mackerel and anchovies, layer them with ungodly amounts of salt in a large stone vat, and then leave the whole gruesome slurry to rot under the hot Mediterranean sun for months. The stench was so legendarily foul that garum factories were legally required to be built outside of city limits. And yet this pungent, fermented fish gut juice was a luxury item, with the finest varieties costing a fortune. It was the ultimate status symbol in Rome, proving you were rich enough to make your entire meal taste like the bottom of a fishing boat. 10. Let's travel to the Andes for a refreshing, traditional beverage with a very personal secret ingredient. Chicha de jora is a fermented corn beer that has been brewed for thousands of years. The process starts with corn, but the key to unlocking its fermentable sugars wasn't yeast as we know it. It was human saliva. The traditional method required the brewers, usually women of the community, to thoroughly chew handfuls of cornmeal and then spit the resulting soggy pulp into a large communal vat of warm water. The enzymes in their saliva would break down the starches, kickstarting the fermentation process. It was a brilliant and effective piece of ancient biotechnology, but it also means that every sip of traditional chicha was the product of a community-wide spitfest. It really changes the meaning of putting a little of yourself into your work. 11. From the rugged wilderness of Canada and Alaska comes a dish that proves no part of an animal should go to waste, not even the most unlikely ones. I'm talking about jellied moose nose. This delicacy begins by taking the upper jaw of a moose and boiling it for hours with onions and spices. Once the coarse hair can be easily plucked away and the flesh is tender, the meat and cartilage of the snout are chopped into fine pieces, put back into the broth, and left to cool. The natural gelatin from the bones and cartilage causes the whole mixture to set into a firm, jiggly, meaty loaf, like a terrine made from a creature's face. Someone, at some point in history, looked at the big goofy schnoz of a moose and decided, I bet that would be fantastic if it had the consistency of Jell-O. 12. Most people aged cheese or wine. In ancient Ireland and Scotland, they aged butter for centuries by burying it in a swamp. This is bog butter, a bizarre and fascinating food preservation method. Huge lumps of animal fat or butter were packed into wooden containers or wrapped in animal hides and then deliberately sunk into peat bogs. The unique chemistry of the bog, cool, low in oxygen, and highly acidic, acted as the perfect natural refrigerator, preserving the fat for hundreds or even thousands of years. And the best part? When modern-day peat cutters or archaeologists unearth these ancient dairy treasures, they are still technically edible. The taste is described as intensely gamey, pungent, and funky, having absorbed the essence of the bog over millennia. It's a snack that's older than most countries. 13. The national dish of Iceland, hakkarl, is not just food. It's a declaration of war against common sense. It's made from the Greenland shark, a creature whose flesh is so full of urea and other toxins that it's poisonous if eaten fresh. So how did the Vikings make it edible? They devised a brilliant but horrifying plan: let it rot. The shark is buried in a shallow pit and covered with sand and heavy stones, which press out the poisonous fluids over several months. Then it's dug up, cut into strips, and hung to dry for another 4 to 5 months, during which it develops a thick crust and an aroma that can only be described as a mixture of ammonia and death. The resulting chewy, white cubes have made even the world's most fearless foodies recoil in horror. 14. The Roman Empire was built on bold ideas, and that extended to their breakfast menus. A wealthy Roman citizen wouldn't settle for simple porridge. They might start their day with a dish of scrambled eggs mixed with fresh sea urchin. This was the pinnacle of morning luxury. They would crack open the spiny creatures to get at the delicate, briny roe inside, then gently fold that into soft scrambled eggs. The result was a creamy, savory, and intensely oceanic dish that tasted like it had been personally delivered from Neptune's kitchen. It was a culinary flex, a way to show off your wealth by casually eating treasures from the seafloor before you even got dressed for the day. Your avocado toast suddenly seems very, very humble in comparison. 15. Imagine attending a lavish 18th century party, nibbling on exquisite ice cream and sipping fine wine, all of it flavored with a rare, mysterious ingredient that was literally worth more than gold. That ingredient was ambergris, which is a fancy way of saying aged whale vomit. Or, to be more scientific, a waxy substance that forms in the digestive system of a sperm whale, likely to protect its intestines from sharp squid beaks, and is then expelled. This lump floats in the ocean for years, cured by the sun and salt water, until it washes ashore smelling sweet and musky. It was the ultimate luxury flavoring for desserts, perfumes, and drinks. It's a mind-boggling concept. One of the most sought-after and expensive flavorings in history was essentially a gallstone from a whale. 16. In Japan, the principle of waste not, want not is taken to a spectacular, eye-popping conclusion. In markets, you can find a product that will stare right back at you: giant tuna eyeballs, often the size of a billiard ball. This isn't a novelty item. It's a common and affordable meal. They are usually gently braised in a sweet and savory mixture of soy sauce, sake, and mirin until the fatty muscles surrounding the eyeball become tender and succulent. Those who are brave enough to try it say the taste is surprisingly mild, similar to squid or mussels. But the flavor is secondary to the sheer visual audacity of the dish. It's a meal that requires you to overcome a very primal instinct that tells you not to eat something that is actively watching you do it. 17. Welcome to Victorian England, a time of industrial progress, strict social etiquette, and food that looked like it was designed in a hospital laboratory. If you were feeling sick or recovering from an illness, your loving family might bring you a bowl of calf's foot jelly. This wasn't a sweet, fruity dessert. This was a wobbly, translucent jelly made by boiling the severed feet of a young cow for hours until all the collagen and gelatin rendered out. The resulting broth would be strained, sometimes sweetened with a bit of sugar and lemon, and then left to set into a jiggly, savory block. It was believed to be incredibly nourishing and easy to digest, but it was essentially a meat-flavored jello made from boiled hooves. It's the kind of comfort food that would probably make you want to get better as quickly as possible, just so you didn't have to eat any more of it. 18. Let's take a trip into the more recent past to discuss a food designed not for pleasure, but for punishment. Meat Nutriloaf, also known as prison loaf. This isn't a single recipe, but rather a culinary concept used in some American prisons as a disciplinary measure for unruly inmates. It's a dense, solid brick of food made by blending and baking a random assortment of whatever is available in the prison kitchen. Think ground vegetables, beans, bread, maybe some meat, all mashed together into a single, joyless, nutritionally complete, but utterly flavor-free lump. It's legally recognized as providing adequate nutrition, but its purpose is purely psychological, to be so bland and monotonous that it breaks the spirit. It's the physical embodiment of the word meh, weaponized into a form of behavioral control. 19. For centuries, sailors on long sea voyages and soldiers on grueling campaigns relied on a food that was less of a meal and more of a building material. It was called hardtack, a simple biscuit made from just flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt, baked until it became as dense and durable as a piece of fired clay. It was virtually indestructible and impervious to spoilage, which was great for long-term storage but terrible for human teeth. These sheet iron crackers were so notoriously hard that soldiers would often have to smash them with a rifle butt or soak them in coffee for half an hour just to make them chewable. They were also a favorite home for weevils, leading to the old soldier's joke of choosing the hardtack that moves the least. 20. The Aztecs were masters of engineering, building the incredible city of Tenochtitlan on a lake. And when you live on a lake, you learn to eat what the lake provides. This brings us to their unique creation, sometimes called lake cheese. This wasn't dairy at all. It was made by harvesting spirulina, a blue-green algae, from the surface of Lake Texcoco with fine nets. This vibrant green sludge was then pressed into cakes and dried in the sun, resulting in a nutrient-rich, protein-packed food with a strong, cheesy, and savory flavor. The Spanish conquistadors were baffled by it, describing the Aztecs eating what looked like dried mud. It was an incredibly sustainable and clever food source, but it's still hard to shake the image of someone skimming scum off a lake and calling it cheese. 21. In most of the Western world, if a farmer sees a strange, gray, tumor-like fungus growing on their corn, they see a diseased crop that needs to be destroyed. In Mexico, they see a delicacy. This fungus is called huitlacoche, or corn smut, and it has been a revered ingredient in Mexican cuisine since the time of the Aztecs. The fungus infects the corn kernels, causing them to swell up into large, gnarled, silvery black galls that look like something from a sci-fi horror film. When cooked, it has a complex, earthy, smoky, and mushroom-like flavor that chefs adore. It's often called the Mexican truffle, a name that tries its best to make you forget that you are, in fact, eating a delicious, inky plant disease. It's a perfect example of how one culture's blight is another culture's blessing. 22. When early explorers and whalers ventured into the desolate, frozen landscapes of Antarctica, they found themselves in a world with very few food options. But there was one animal in abundance, the penguin. For these desperate seafarers, penguins weren't cute, waddling birds. They were a walking source of protein. To preserve the meat for long journeys, they would kill the penguins, skin them, and pack the meat in barrels with salt, a process known as salting. This method would keep the meat from spoiling, but it also made it incredibly tough and intensely salty. It was a food of pure survival, a grim necessity in one of the harshest environments on Earth. It's a sobering reminder that our modern view of penguins as adorable mascots is a luxury those early sailors simply couldn't afford. 23. For thousands of years across Asia, one of the most prized delicacies from the ocean has been the humble sea cucumber. This isn't a vegetable, it's a leathery, slug-like creature that scours the ocean floor. And getting it ready to eat is a Herculean task. In its dried form, it's as hard as a rock and requires days, sometimes weeks, of meticulous soaking and rehydrating to become even remotely edible. Once prepared, it has a very unique, gelatinous, and slightly chewy texture that absorbs the flavor of whatever it's cooked with. While it's revered for its texture and supposed health benefits, for the uninitiated, it's like chewing on a piece of flavorless, cartilaginous jelly that used to be a living vacuum cleaner for the bottom of the sea. 24. Scotland is known for its hearty, no-nonsense cuisine, and nothing embodies that spirit more than scurly. At its core, this dish is just oatmeal, but it's a world away from your sweet breakfast porridge. To make scurly, you toast coarse oatmeal in a pan with a generous amount of hot beef fat, or sweet until it's nutty and crispy. Onions are often added for extra flavor. It was a cheap, filling way to add substance and a savory crunch to meals, often used as a stuffing for poultry or served alongside potatoes. But let's be honest about what's happening here. You are essentially deep-frying oats in pure animal fat. It's the kind of dish that makes you feel your arteries hardening with every delicious, greasy bite. It's simple, it's heavy, and it's unapologetically Scottish. 25. In the mid-20th century, the future of food looked a lot like a science experiment, and nothing proves that more than the invention of canned bread. This wasn't just bread stored in a can. It was bread that was literally baked inside the can. The dough was placed in a greased can, sealed, and then steamed, cooking the bread into a perfectly cylindrical, crustless, and unnervingly moist loaf. To serve, you would open both ends of the can and slide out the pale, dense tube of bread, which could then be sliced into perfect little circles. It was a marvel of convenience for its time, but it has the distinct appearance of a food item that was never meant to exist in nature. It looks less like something from a bakery and more like a prop from a cartoon, a perfectly round loaf that defies all logic and aesthetics of traditional bread. 26. Long before the invention of refrigerators or modern canning, people had to get creative with long-term food storage, which brings us to the 17th century delicacy of potted pigeons. The process was a masterpiece of preservation. Plump pigeons were roasted or boiled, then meticulously deboned. The meat was packed tightly into an earthenware pot, and here's the crucial part, completely submerged in a thick layer of clarified butter. Once the butter hardened, it created an airtight seal, protecting the meat from spoilage for months. When you were ready for a snack, you just break the butter seal and dig in. It was a rich, decadent, and incredibly practical way to keep meat, but it also meant that your pantry contained jars of birds entombed in a solid gold tomb of fat. 27. King Henry I of England had a notorious obsession with one particular food: lamprey pie. Lampreys are not fish. They are ancient, jawless, parasitic creatures that look like demonic eels. They latch onto other fish with a horrifying suction cup mouth filled with concentric circles of sharp teeth and drink their blood. Despite their monstrous appearance, they were considered a supreme delicacy in medieval Europe. They were baked into elaborate pies, often stewed in a rich sauce of their own blood and wine. King Henry loved them so much that in the year 1135, against his doctor's advice, he reportedly gorged himself on a surfeit of lampreys and died shortly after. He was literally killed by his favorite snack. This is the only food on our list with a confirmed royal body count. 28. For centuries, the River Thames in London was not just a waterway, it was a primary source of food for the city's inhabitants. And one of the most popular catches wriggling in its murky depths was the eel. This led to the creation of a quintessential working-class London dish, eel pie. Freshly caught eels were chopped up, bones and all, and baked into a pie with a simple pastry crust, often with a savory parsley liquor sauce. While it was a cheap and abundant source of protein for generations of Londoners, the idea of eating a pie filled with snake-like river dwellers is a tough sell for the modern palate. It's a dish born of necessity, a reminder of a time when you ate what you could catch, even if it looked like it just swam out of a gothic horror story. 29. If you believe that food should also be a form of surrealist art, then stargazy pie from Cornwall, England, is the dish for you. This is a traditional pie filled with eggs, potatoes, and whole pilchards, which are a type of sardine. But it's the presentation that makes it unforgettable. The heads of the fish are left on and arranged to poke out through the pastry crust, their tiny fish faces gazing upwards towards the heavens, as if contemplating their own delicious doom. The logic behind this bizarre arrangement was actually practical. It allowed the flavorful oils from the fish heads to run down and baste the pie's contents as it cooked. Practical or not, the final result is a meal that looks like a tragic, aquatic art installation, and it's guaranteed to be the most memorable dish at any dinner party. 30. In medieval and Tudor feasts, the spectacle on the table was just as important as the taste of the food. And no dish was more spectacular or bizarrely vain than the boiled peacock. To prepare this showstopper, the peacock was painstakingly skinned, ensuring its magnificent plumage remained completely intact. The bird was then roasted or boiled. Once cooked, it was meticulously redressed in its own skin and feathers, often with its beak gilded in gold leaf and its impressive tail feathers fanned out as if it were still alive. It was then paraded into the dining hall to the astonishment of the guests. The problem? Peacock meat itself is notoriously tough, dry, and stringy. The guests were essentially eating a beautiful, incredibly chewy disappointment. It was the ultimate triumph of style over substance. 31. The ancient Romans were known for their extreme luxury, and their culinary tastes were no exception. One of the most absurd examples of this was the parrot tongue pie. Wealthy Romans believed that by eating the tongues of birds, known for their ability to mimic human speech, such as parrots and nightingales, they could enhance their own eloquence and wit. As a result, they would dispatch hunters to capture thousands of these birds, painstakingly remove their tiny tongues, and bake them into a single, extravagant pie. This wasn't about flavor. It was about conspicuous consumption on a ridiculous scale. It was a dish that required the slaughter of countless beautiful talking birds just so a wealthy senator could serve a party appetizer that symbolized how rich and bored he was. 32. The Tudors had a real flair for naming things, and no dessert name in history is more wonderfully, bafflingly absurd than farts of Portingale. Before you let your imagination run wild, this was not a dish involving actual flatulence. It was a small, puffy pastry or cake, likely similar to a modern beignet or a fritter, made with eggs, sugar, and spices, and then fried until it puffed up with air. The name likely came from a combination of its airy, puffy nature and its supposed origin from Portugal. Still, you have to admire the sheer confidence of a chef who could present a delicate dessert to a royal court and announce, without a hint of irony, that they were serving everyone a plate of Portuguese farts. It's a name that guarantees no one will ever forget your dessert. 33. During Lent, observant Catholics were forbidden from eating meat on Fridays, but fish was allowed. This led to some very creative theological interpretations of what exactly constitutes a fish. In the 17th century, the Bishop of Quebec, ruling on the matter for the beaver-rich lands of North America, made a landmark decision. He declared that the beaver, due to its scaly, flat tail, and aquatic lifestyle, could be classified as a fish for culinary purposes. This meant that Catholics could happily feast on juicy, fatty beaver tail on Fridays without sinning. This wasn't just a quirky local custom, it was an official ecclesiastical ruling. It's a perfect historical example of finding a delicious, divinely sanctioned loophole when you're really craving barbecue, but it's a Friday in Lent. So, from jellied moose face to whale vomit perfume, we've journeyed through history's most questionable appetites. But I know for a fact that this list is incomplete. Every country, every culture has that one legendary, stomach-churning dish that locals whisper about. So now it's your turn. What's the one disgusting historical food from your corner of the world that we were criminally negligent to leave out? Expose the culinary horrors in the comments. And if you have the stomach for more history that school didn't dare teach you, you know what to do with the like and subscribe buttons.